Hello, everyone. My name is Renee. I will be leading the discussion on chapter 5, I believe, about what is intersectionality and why do we need it. Um, so you should have all got my worksheet for this discussion. The main points of the author are in green, discussion questions are in blue, and my personal thoughts and reflections are in purple. And then black is just any supplemental statements or ideas. To begin with the first main point, just what is intersectionality? The definition that the author gives is the belief that our social justice movement must consider all of the intersections of identity, privilege, and oppression that people face in order to be just and effective. I thought that was a really good definition. The original term, as the author also mentions, was coined by a woman named Kimberly Crenshaw, and she actually has a TED Talk explaining further what intersectionality is, and so I'm just going to play a short clip from there.
Now, the experience that gave rise to intersectionality was my chance encounter with a woman named Emma DeGraffenreid. Emma DeGraffenreid was an African-American woman, a working wife, and a mother. I actually read about Emma's story from the pages of a legal opinion written by a judge who had dismissed Emma's claim of race and gender discrimination against a local car manufacturing plant. Emma, like so many African-American women, sought better employment for her family and for others. She wanted to create a better life for her children and for her family. But she applied for a job and she was not hired, and she believed that she was not hired because she was a black woman. Now, the judge in question dismissed Emma's suit. And the argument for dismissing the suit was that the employer did hire African Americans and the employer hired women. The real problem, though, that the judge was not willing to acknowledge was what Emma was actually trying to say, that the African Americans that were hired, usually for industrial jobs, maintenance jobs, were all men. And the women that were hired, usually for secretarial or front office work, were all white. Only if the court was able to see how these policies came together would he be able to see the double discrimination that Emma DeGraffenreid was facing. But the court refused to allow Emma to put two causes of action together to tell her story because he believed that by allowing her to do that, she would be able to have preferential treatment. She'd have an advantage by being able to have two swings at the bat when African American men and white women only had one swing at the bat. But, of course, neither African American men or white women needed to combine a race and gender discrimination claim to tell the story of the discrimination they were experiencing. Why wasn't the real unfairness law's refusal to protect African American women simply because their experiences weren't exactly the same as white women and African American men? Rather than broadening the frame to include African American women, the court simply tossed their case completely out of court. Now, as a student of anti-discrimination law, as a feminist, as an anti-racist, I was struck by this case. It felt to me like injustice squared. So first of all, black women weren't allowed to work at the plant. Second of all, the court doubled down on this exclusion by making it legally inconsequential. And to boot, there was no name for this problem. And we all know that where there's no name for a problem, you can't see a problem. And when you can't see a problem, you pretty much can't solve it. Many years later, I'd come to recognize that the problem that Emma was facing was a framing problem. the frame that the court was using to see gender discrimination or to see race discrimination was partial and it was distorting. For me, the challenge that I faced was trying to figure out whether there was an alternative narrative, a prism that would allow us to see Emma's dilemma, a prism that would allow us to rescue her from the cracks in the law, that would allow judges to see her story. So it occurred to me, maybe a simple analogy to an intersection might allow judges to better see Emma's dilemma. So if we think about this intersection, the roads to the intersection would be the way that the workforce was structured by race and by gender. And then the traffic in those roads would be the hiring policies and the other practices that ran through those roads. Now, because Emma was both Black and female, she was positioned precisely where those roads overlapped, experiencing the simultaneous impact of the company's gender and race traffic. The law, the law was like that ambulance that shows up and is ready to treat Emma only if it can be shown that she was harmed on the race road or on the gender road, but not where those roads intersected. So, what do you call being impacted by multiple forces and then abandoned to fend for yourself? Intersectionality seemed to do it for me.
All right, so that video hopefully gives you a better understanding of what intersectionality is, and how integrated and complex it can also be. So the widely accepted big 8 identities are race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, gender, citizenship or nationality, sexual orientation, age, religion, and ability, disability. These identities have been chosen as the big 8 because most of them are identities that you're either born into or have no control over. Some of these, of course, do have the opportunity to change, but often not without some difficulty. So for our first discussion question, choose any combination of 2 or 3 identities from these big 8 that you have and explain to a partner how this combination gives you a privilege. So go ahead and think about which identities you might combine. Now, with the partner who's either sitting next to you, share with them how this combination of identities gives you a privilege. You have 1 minute to share, and just trying to make sure both have time to share within that 1 minute. All right, go. All right, that should be about a minute. Everyone come back together. For the next discussion question, now choose any combination of 2 or 3 of those big 8 identities and explain to your partner how this combination causes you to be oppressed in a unique way. Go ahead and think about what you might choose. Now go ahead and share with your partner. You have a minute and make sure both can share within the minute. All right, go. All right, that should be about a minute. Now we'll take some time for those who want to share out with the group. Either an intersectionality you have that gives you a privilege or an intersectionality that causes you to be oppressed in a unique way. So I can go ahead and pause the video so you have the time you need to discuss. So the second main point I thought there was that social justice movements tend to neglect the issues that are specific to intersectionality. So for our discussion question for this one, why do you think integrating intersectionality in today's movements is a hard concept to grasp and act on? Go ahead and share with the partner. All right, that's about a minute. Go ahead and bring it back to focus. Olu, the author, she provides her own reasons in the reading as to why she thinks intersectionality is overlooked. One of the reasons being social movements focus on the most privileged of the group. Um, intersectionality slows things down. I personally thought of this one when I first was trying to think of why social justice movements don't include intersectionality. Because when I start to think of how my identities play off one another and the dark, complicated histories behind some of my intersections, I get pretty overwhelmed with the idea of trying to tackle these issues. How can such a broken society be fixed when its issues have deep and widespread roots? It just doesn't seem like a feasible task at times. Like I think of Angela Davis's book, Are Prisons Obsolete? And how prisons are racist and sexist in themselves, with how they started and how the prison system grew within its racism and sexism. And so because of that, they must be abolished. But I mean, with some of my identities, what can I abolish to relieve my oppressions? Like people's thoughts for the most part. Like the colonialist mentality, slave master mentalities, fetishes, Eurocentric beauty standards, manifest destiny, or even soap. Um, that one's an interesting one. I took a beauty in a global age class a couple years ago, and turns out soap low key, or actually no, high key started out as racist when it became a commodity in Europe in the 1800s. So yeah, when there's like issues that go back hundreds of years and are connected to things even as mundane as soap, the idea of trying to solve all these issues that are woven together, it just doesn't seem like it's possible. So movements or solutions not being reached because of intersectionality is something I definitely thought of. The author also says that intersectionality requires people to acknowledge the privilege. And I felt this point was very important because it is very easy to get caught up in how we are oppressed and why we have the right to be mad. But then we often forget the fact that we do have some privilege somewhere. Like, for example, one thing you might want to consider from the earlier discussions, did you have difficulty thinking of a privilege you have? Or of the big eight identities, were there any that you never considered as a possible privilege before you read those? So, acknowledging privilege can be very difficult, especially when we're caught up in our oppression. Another reason was that intersectionality decentralizes the privileged group. And, no one really likes the spotlight being taken off of them. And then her last point she made, which I thought was pretty big, was that intersectionality forces people to interact with, listen to, and consider people who they don't usually interact with, listen to, or consider. So like even those leading social movement groups, they have some kind of bias too. We're human. We are multiple creatures. It is nearly impossible to resist all the social conditioning our society puts us through. So with our social conditionings and biases we develop, there's certain interactions we might not be comfortable or familiar with. But to truly understand a person's intersectionality, we might have to get uncomfortable, or we probably will get uncomfortable. Go ahead and pause the video here and share out loud to the class just thoughts on why you think social movement groups don't account for intersectionality or even provide examples in which you've seen this. All right, and leading to the next and last main point, the author had a statement that said, our government, education system, economic system, and social systems all should consider intersectionality if they have any hope of effectively serving the public. So since every individual has their own unique combination of identities, and some combinations result in compound oppression and more oppression than other combinations, accounting for intersectionality is necessary for us to achieve true equity. And I supplied the definitions of equality versus equity because that is something that needs to be understood if you want to talk about intersectionality. Equality is just a state of being equal, treating everyone the same and giving equal opportunity. Whereas equity is defined as giving everyone what they need to be successful. So this definition of equity I really like because it acknowledges that there are some marginalized groups that need more opportunity to succeed because there are systems in place specifically meant to prevent their success. Taking what we have learned from previous classes, how can acknowledging intersectionality help address issues with our current prison system? Think of the woman we saw in It's Criminal and what they've gone through, or what you might have read from the Tenacious magazines. You can go ahead and pause the video. So, to conclude this discussion, I just wanted to do one final activity for you all to do personally. I want you all to claim your uniqueness and your individuality by just writing out your overall intersectionality identity according to those big eight identities. And we don't have to share them, but I bet that there's no two people in this room that would have the same statement. And that concludes this discussion, and I hope you all learned something new. Thank you.